While the whole world has been fixated on Iran for weeks, where Iran's conflict with the United States and Israel keeps escalating and has led to a global oil crisis, something unbelievable is happening less than 600 kilometers from Iran's borders. In the middle of Afghanistan's bone-dry desert, a structure of such gigantic proportions is being built that it can even be clearly seen from space. A structure that could not only change Central Asia geopolitically forever, but also carries the serious risk of igniting a completely new war over resources very different from oil. We are talking about the Qosh Tepa Canal, and the frightening thing is this billion-dollar project is being carried out by none other than the Taliban, and it shows that the rest of the world still underestimates the Taliban technically and financially. In this video, we want to tell you everything about the unbelievable construction of this megaproject. We will show you how the Taliban managed to build this gigantic structure without foreign help, why it could make them more powerful than ever before, and how it could further inflame global tensions. The dimensions of the Qosh Tepa Canal megaproject are almost unbelievable. The canal is planned to be 285 kilometers long, 115 meters wide, and 8.5 meters deep. If this canal were in another country, it would be one of the largest rivers, and either way, it is one of the largest canals in the world. Analysts estimate that a canal of this size would cost up to 20 billion euros to build, while according to projections, the Taliban are expected to spend only around 600 million euros in total on its construction. We will explain exactly how that is possible a little later. But it is not only the scale of the canal that is overwhelming, it is also its location. The canal begins at the Amu Darya River, right by the border with Tajikistan. From there, the canal first runs several kilometers south before turning west, where it eventually reaches the Faryab region. But this exact route of the Qosh Tepa Canal is, of course, no coincidence. On the contrary, it follows a radical strategic calculation. To understand the strategy behind the Qosh Tepa Canal, we need to take a closer look at Central Asia, and especially northern Afghanistan. As we already said, the Qosh Tepa Canal begins at the Amu Darya River, but this river is not just any source of water. In fact, its origins lie in the Pamir Mountains, the fourth highest mountain range in the world. From there, the river flows through Tajikistan, past Afghanistan, through Turkmenistan, and on to Uzbekistan, where it then flows into the Aral Sea. Or rather, where it used to flow into it, because just a few decades ago, huge amounts of water still arrive there. Today, however, the end of the river has completely dried up. But how is that possible? In reality, the Amu Darya is one of the most important water sources for Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Both countries use the water mainly for agriculture and for growing cotton, one of the region's most important export goods. But that is not all. Tajikistan in particular also dams parts of the river's water in order to generate electricity. One example of this is the Nurek Dam. It is one of the largest dams in the world and supplies hundreds of thousands of people with electricity. So the Amu Darya is enormously important, both for Tajikistan but especially for Uzbekistan. And yet Afghanistan is now tapping into it. Why? The reason is quickly explained. Afghanistan is fighting for basic survival. Especially in the north of the country, the drought is so extreme that agriculture is barely possible. The hunger crisis there has therefore become so severe that analysts estimate more than 20 million people are chronically undernourished purely because of the extreme drought in the region. That is exactly why the water from the Qosh Tepa Canal is supposed to flow into the Faryab region. There, its water is intended to irrigate more than 550,000 hectares of farmland. But that is not all, because alongside the hunger crisis, the Taliban are mainly concerned with one thing: power. But to understand that, we need to briefly look at Afghanistan's recent history. It all began in May 2021. That month, NATO began withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan. The consequences were devastating, because within just a few months, the Taliban managed to bring the country back under their control. In August 2021, they captured Kabul, Afghanistan's capital, and since then they have been the ruling force in Afghanistan. Since this takeover, however, the Taliban have been completely isolated internationally. Foreign accounts have been frozen, they are not recognized as a government, and above all, they are subject to economic sanctions. And that is a huge problem, because until now, Afghanistan has always depended on imports for its food supply, which made the Taliban vulnerable to outside pressure. Through the canal, they could therefore manage to take an important means of pressure away from the rest of the world. But it gets even more extreme, because while the canal would make them harder to pressure, it would also give them control over the most important resource in the region: water. This would force other countries to negotiate diplomatically with the Taliban and could also allow them to secure favorable terms when importing electricity. And finally, the Taliban also want to use their project to win over the Afghan population. Many people in Afghanistan would mainly notice the positive effects, such as flourishing agriculture. If this gives the Taliban more support from their own population, it will become even harder for other countries to keep ignoring the regime. At this point, one question naturally arises: how on earth are the Taliban managing to finance the project at all? The answer is as simple as it is astonishing. The Taliban are not getting a single cent from the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. Instead, they are using their own natural resources, especially coal, which they export to neighboring Pakistan. It is estimated that income from mining and national taxes is flowing almost directly into the construction of the canal. It is a closed cycle that works entirely without loans from abroad. But that still does not explain why the construction is so extremely cheap compared with Europe. While a project like this in Europe would swallow billions for bureaucracy, environmental regulations, and insurance, the Taliban do not care about such things. Instead, they rely on brutal pragmatism. First, the equipment. The Taliban are using thousands of machines, excavators, and trucks that, ironically, were largely left behind by the United States Army and the previous government. So they are building their megaproject with the tools of their former enemies. Second, the construction process itself is extremely minimalist. You could also say highly risky. Because while a canal of this size in Europe would be elaborately sealed with concrete, the Taliban are simply digging the bed directly into the bare sand and low soil. There are no protective liners, no sealed canal bed, and no concrete reinforcements along the banks. And the embankments of the Qosh Tepa Canal consist only of loosely compacted earth. And this point is probably the biggest problem with the project. Numerous engineers warn that much of the water could simply seep away instead of being used for agriculture, and that the canal may not be stable enough to remain safely contained along its route. This could even lead to local flooding. As you can see, the Qosh Tepa Canal is far more than an ordinary construction project. Above all, it is a geopolitical weapon for the Taliban. Because what the Strait of Hormuz is for oil, this canal could become for the water of Central Asia. The Taliban have realized this. You do not need nuclear bombs to force world powers to the negotiating table. It is enough to control the tap of an entire region. However, the Taliban will only succeed if the canal does not turn into a total engineering disaster. Because due to its poor construction, the entire project could backfire, trigger a real ecological catastrophe, and make northern Afghanistan even more uninhabitable than it already is. Finally, the canal could also spark a new struggle over resources, because Afghanistan may want to use this new leverage to gain cheap access to electricity. In the most extreme case, the canal could therefore even plunge the region into armed conflicts once again. In any case, the project is already so dangerous that the international community really cannot continue to ignore it. But what do you think about this insane construction project? Do you believe it will fail? Or will it help the Taliban become more powerful than ever? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.